Just waiting for the slides. Okay. So as they say, today we're going to talk about LLMs as domain experts. So a quick introduction. My name is Talysson Oliveira. I'm a software architect and chief learning officer at CodeMiner42. I come from Brazil, so I'm very glad you all have me here. Thank you. If you don't know the company, CodeMiner is a software boutique based in Brazil. We offer expertise in Ruby, JavaScript, Node.js, front-end, Go, and mobile development as well. We just released a new website, so if you want to know more about us, just access our URL and you can know more about the services we provide. But let's go to the core of the content that we're going to talk about. So just for the scope, for this talk, I want to explain what I mean by domain here. So what is the domain? So in the real world, we usually have some fields of knowledge or fields of influence that we, it already exists all the time in the real world. So by that I mean things like finance and health, education, commerce, aviation, mining, transportation. Anyway, all of those broad fields of knowledge and influence that we already have in the real world is not something that we're creating here. We're just recognizing that it exists. And this is what I mean by domain. There's something very broad. But usually when we're trying to solve some problem, either with software or not, we don't try to reproduce the whole domain and create a simulator of the whole domain inside of our software, inside of our project. We actually usually choose some small problem inside that domain to solve to the user. And even when we have a problem to solve, we never use the whole domain to solve that problem. We actually carve a small part of that domain and all the concepts that are related to the problem that we're trying to solve and offer something that is either part of the solution or part of the problem field or the solution field. We don't use the whole domain. We actually create a system of abstraction that are going to describe some specific parts of that domain that are related to the problems that we're trying to solve. So, and when I say system of abstractions here, I don't mean abstractions in code. I mean conceptual abstractions. The ways to represent concepts from the real world inside of our project, inside of our team. Any simplification or translation of terms that come from the domain that we're going to refer to inside of your project. That carved out part from the domain is what we usually call the domain model. So it's just a small part of the domain that are related to the problem that we're trying to solve and the way we represent those concepts inside the project. This is the domain model. So the question here is actually, so a very smaller example to show here. Let's say we can represent our domain with an airplane. What we're going to have inside of our project, inside of our team, is not a simulator, like a realistic simulator of an airplane. What we're going to have instead is something more similar to airplane model. So only the important aspects to our project are going to be represented there. So when you think about plane models, we usually don't care about the fuel or I don't know, the passengers or the seats or any of those. We just want it to be as aerodynamic as a real plane. So we choose things from the domain to be represented in the model based on their business relevance, or if they appear in some conversations inside the team, or if they are part of some business rules that are needed to solve that problem, to make decisions during the development of the project. So how do we cultivate the model? And I use the word cultivate here because the model is not created out of thin air. We actually cultivate it collaboratively inside the team, including everyone that is part of the solution for that problem. So most of the projects, when we have developers included, we're going to have a team of development experts and a team of domain experts that don't necessarily knows about programming, but they do know about the domain. So if you're dealing with, I don't know, finance, we're going to have people that know about the finance rules and how the finance laws works, and they don't necessarily know about programming, but they do know what is the conceptual solution for the problem that you're proposing to solve. So in the beginning of the project, they do have to communicate. I mean, they actually have to communicate all the time, but at the beginning of the project, that communication won't be in tune yet. You have domain experts talking domain lingo and domain concepts, and you're going to see the programmers talking about technology and, I don't know, Docker or database or any of those, and they're probably not going to be in sync, at least in the beginning. The idea here is that with time and communication, they're going to get to a point where they both have a same shared mental model. So they try to cultivate that model in a way that both sides understand each other the same way. And when they get to a point, this is what I mean by the domain model. Ideally, with time, not only the mental model is the same, but they start to talk the same language. They start to use the same terms for the same things. And when we're practicing DDD, or when we consider the usage of domain models, we usually call this language that is shared between these teams and used to describe the terms from the domain model. We usually call it the ubiquitous language. It's just a fancy term to mean that they talk the same language and they mean the same things based in the same terms and words. So there are some situations that the domain expert might not be available. And why is that? When does that happen? So maybe the available time of them they're scarce. Maybe the domain experts are just hired part-time, or they can't talk to the development team all the time. Maybe the access to them is complicated. Maybe they're in a different time zone or something like that. So, or maybe they even speak a different language. So talking to them is something that's really difficult. Maybe the communication is not in tune yet. Maybe one of the teams are not very acceptive to talking to the other team for some reasons. Programmers love to do that and blame the other side and say that, okay, they don't understand what I'm talking about, but usually not the blame to the other side. It's actually the programmer's blame. And maybe the team doesn't even have a domain expert yet. Maybe the problem that you're trying to solve is too new, or maybe don't have the money to hire a domain expert, so you might not even have one. So the question here is, can we use LLMs in these situations? So the answer is yes, or at least kind of yes. Let's talk about it and see how we can do that. So it's important to understand that the model exists in the shared understanding of the team. And an LLM can't cultivate a model. Like, the model is a mental model. Therefore, the LLMs don't have a mind, so they can't cultivate a model. They can't actually grasp how the model exists, how the model, the meaning of the terms of the model and stuff like that. We need to set this up before. But the thing is that we can use the LLMs to provide information about the domain in a way to empower our team to build a better model. Okay, let's talk about how to use LLMs to enrich your knowledge about the domain in order for you to make it better while cultivating the model. So as I say, the ideal scenario is when the domain experts and the development expert, they are in tune, they're speaking the ubiquitous language, and they know what each other mean. But sometimes that communication is not tuned yet, or sometimes the domain expert might not be present all the time, or maybe present never. So to solve that, we're actually going to prime the communication, the knowledge of the other teams that need to interact with the actual domain expert in a way that we do it first, we talk to the LLM first and know better, in a way that when we finally get to talk to the domain expert, we can make the most of that interaction. We actually can optimize that communication, that scarce moment of time that we have available talking to domain experts. So let's use a theoretical example here. Let's say that I do have some domain that I'm solving a problem at, and I try to talk to LLM about that. I ask questions about that for me to improve my communication with the actual domain experts. But if I don't know exactly, and I don't specify exactly to the LLM what I'm looking for, I'm going to get, the LLM is probably going to hallucinate. I'm going to get answers for every kind of different subject and not exactly just the domain I'm looking for. And this happens because if you don't know where we're going, every road can lead us there. Like, we need to know where we're trying to get there, where we're trying to get. And if you want to use some modern term for that, we can say that we can vibe our way. Oops. I think the clicker is not working. Okay, wait. It's working again. So what I mean by that is that we can vibe our way to something that we can recognize when to get there. If you just go with the flow, you actually can't know when you get to the point that you actually know information that is going to help you solve that problem. So instead of just asking about the whole domain to a LLM, you're going to ask about your specific problem that you're trying to solve, in a way that the chances that you're going to get useful answers from the LLM are way higher. So all the answers are going to be around that problem that you're looking for, that part of the domain knowledge that is actually useful for you to solve that problem. So I want to use a small example here. Let's say that we're building a project that deals with special in-flight meals. So if I just use like in-flight meals to talk about with the LLM and just get to the LLM, I hope you can all read that. And if you just get to the LLM and say, okay, can you just tell me everything that I should know about the special in-flight meals? We're gonna get all sorts of answers, and you can notice that they're all from different classes of different fields of knowledge. So maybe they're gonna talk about how the in-flight meals are made, and some tips for the passengers, how to make it like order in a cheaper way or something like that, or maybe the logistics, and all of those. So notice that even though they all talk about in-flight meals, they're very different answers, and maybe they're not useful for us. If we just try to consume all of this information, we're probably gonna get confused by that, especially if we're programmers. We don't know, we don't have the domain knowledge. So we just give a step back when we get to the point, we take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, what is the actual problem that I'm trying to solve? So you do a step back and check, okay, what about the special in-flight meals I'm trying to solve? And we notice that in this example, our project aims to allow airlines to offer special in-flight meals paid in advance for the customers, and then the customers can order special meals up to 5 hours before the boarding. After that, a list of meals is then sent to a special restaurant that is going to cook it and just deliver it directly to the airport. And then customers can rate their experience and then gain points in the loyalty program and get discounts and all of those. So notice that even though the domain that we're working on is special in-flight meals, the problem that we're actually trying to solve here is logistics. Even though it is related to in-flight meals, it's not the whole in-flight meals domain. It's about logistics of this. So notice that in that previous answer that we got before, only the fourth answer was actually useful for us about the subject that we're trying to solve. But it didn't provide like very useful information, it's just very scarce information. So we go back to the LLM in a brand new conversation, and now we ask a very different way. We don't ask like, what is everything about in-flight meals that you want to know? We ask about what are the key concepts when it comes to the logistics of in-flight meals. And then again, we're gonna get a lot of other answers that even though there is as much as information as before, that information is way more focused now, is way more useful for us right now. And we can just skim that information and begin to hunt some of the useful terms that we get from there, and there's probably gonna be mentioned when we finally talk to the human domain experts. So now, after doing that, after skimming all this information that are provided by the LLM, we get to a point that we have a whole cloud of new terms that are probably going to be used when we finally talk to domain experts. And it's important to know that in order to be optimized about that, and we don't have to ask the human domain expert about that all the time during the final conversation. So what we're going to do is going to take each of these important terms, important key concepts that we got from the conversation with the LLM, and then ask about this concept in the same conversation with the LLM. And by same conversation, I mean the same LLM context, the same chat. So for example, if you get it and ask about the HACCP, which is a term provided by them before, we're gonna get a whole new answer that even though it's not as deep as the ideal, it make you not be ignorant about what is the HACCP. And when you get to a point to talk to a domain expert and they mention the term HACCP, you won't have to ask them what that is about. You already know that. You already know at least what they meant by that. And you're going to optimize your way towards having a domain model shared with the domain expert and speak a ubiquitous language. So notice that in this point, we don't use the LLM to model, to cultivate our model. We actually use it to optimize the conversation that we finally have with actual domain experts, with human domain experts. Okay, but what if there are no domain experts? This is a case that we need to consider. So Again, I'm a programmer, so I'm talking from this perspective. Usually programmers don't know a lot about domain concepts. They do know about technology, they do know about databases and programming languages. So between themselves, they're gonna only talk about technology, which is not ideal when you're trying to solve a problem. If they pretend they do know about the domain, there's actually gonna be a lot of confusion. So we're gonna do a very similar process here. We're going to have all the programmers to talk to a LLM before about that same domain that we're trying to get knowledge. That would be ideal to everyone to share the same LLM context in a way that if they hallucinate, at least it's going to be hallucinate the same way for everyone, to a point that they're going to get and acquire actual domain knowledge. And now after that point, they actually can talk, speak a ubiquitous language, they can understand each other, they can actually understand the domain problem that you're trying to solve. So in this case, what we're going to do is that we're going to make the development expert also become the domain expert. That's not ideal, but sometimes this is needed, especially if it's a brand new problem that you're trying to solve. So what we're going to do in this case is that we're going to use LLMs to empower our team, while the team itself and not the LLM is going to cultivate the domain model. Okay, so let's say that we already have a domain model, but we also want to find a way to use the LLMs to spread the information about the LLM model in an easier way, make it easier for people to just onboard you on the team, actually grasp it easier and faster. So what we can do is that, anyway, again, we need to understand that LLMs can cultivate a model. So first of all, LLMs can think, like they can generate text. That's what LLMs do. They don't understand, they don't reason, they just produce text. So you can't teach them the model because they don't have a mind. They can't grasp a mental model. What you can do instead is that you can document the model and then feed it to the LLM in a way that you're going to make the LLM be able to produce text based on that documentation. And I want to quote a paper by Peter Nauer from 1985 called Programming as Theory Building, where he mentions that the programming activity is not about writing code or writing documentation or specification. It's actually about finding a conceptual solution for a problem. And in that paper, he says that the programmer's knowledge transcends the knowledge given in documentation, meaning that the documentation does not contain the totality of the model. Some concepts are not possible to be expressed in text or even in image. They are mental. They're about the communication between people. It doesn't mean that documentation is not good. Like, it just means that it's not enough, but it can be good enough. As long as you understand that it's not just good enough, it's not the totality of the model, that's fine. So what we're going to do now is that we actually try to document our domain model in the better the possible to make it useful for the LLMs. So how do we actually document a domain model? So the first part is actually documenting the subdomains and bounded context. If you don't know that, there's just divisions inside of the conceptual fields of the problem that you're trying to solve. And by documenting that, I mean documenting the scopes of the division of your teams, and create a glossary of the ubiquitous language. That is a term that we already know. So actually give the meaning of each of the words and terms that are used inside your team. Document the context map, how each of the parts of your team interact with each other, how they depend on each other. Also document your use case and user stories. What are all the important flows that your user is going to have to go through while interacting with your project. And also, if you're producing code, if your team, part of the solution for that problem includes producing code, you should also document the technical patterns that you're using, like what are the aggregates and entities, value objects, and any other DDD concept that your team might be using. It's important just not to just document that. If you're going to use an LLM to help that, you should make that documentation LLM friendly. And by that I mean, don't leave any important concept implicit. Like human beings reading documentation might find something weird and ask about it. LLMs don't do that. LLMs always have an answer even if that answer is wrong. So don't leave any important term or important concept implicit. Make it as explicit as possible. Also, when images are needed, which is fine, try to add some description on that. Don't leave the image to be interpreted by LLM in a way that if they hallucinate, they're going to pretend there's some data there that doesn't exist. At least add some subtitle to the image in a way that when the LLM is reading that documentation, they know what that is meant to represent. And also explicitly state any possible misunderstanding. Maybe inside your team there's some concept or some term that is all the time misunderstood by someone. Say that explicitly in your documentation. So you can say like, don't confuse that concept with that another concept. They're different because of that. They might look similar because of that, but they're different in that part. Make that explicit. Remember that those are not humans that are reading that documentation. It's an LLMs trying to consume that and then producing text for a human being. And you can also use some tools that to automate and make it even more LLM friendly. So for example, if you're using LLM chat tool that does support shared workspaces in a way that everyone shares the same workspace, share the same context, use that, that's gonna be useful as well. Connect the LLM to MCP servers of your documentation, so it's going to save some time and frustration about copying from the documentation and pasting into the LLM. You're going to see that GitHub supports that, Confluence supports that, Notion supports that, and every other documentation platform supports that nowadays. So it's going to save us time and also going to avoid that we end up with some outdated information that was copy-pasted. And also, if you're producing code during the solution for the problem that you're proposing to solve, you can use well-known LLM-friendly formats for coding tools. And by that I mean like agents.md or Claude.md. Just remember to keep it as aligned with the original documentation that you created before as possible. So it's also important to remember that no documentation is way better than bad or outdated documentation. Like this is documentation that we're gonna have, you're gonna feed to LLM, and a human being is gonna depend and rely on that information generated by the LLM. So if you're feeding wrong information, you're gonna get wrong information back. So just remember to keep your documentation updated. If you get to a point that your team just don't want to update or they don't have time for that, just prefer to just delete it. It's better to not have information at all than having just wrong information. Okay, so for closing, how can we use LLM as domain experts? How can we wrap up this subject? So we can say that LLMs can be fully trusted. We know they can hallucinate. And arguably, we can say that human beings are like this as well. Like you can talk to some domain expert or someone from expert from some other field. They can make a mistake when they're talking something, or maybe they misunderstood the question. That's fine. Both of them can make mistakes. The difference here is that a human being can be held accountable. You can never leave some decision, some business decision to AI to take without some human being to actually confirm, because you can blame a machine, you can hold a machine accountable. If a machine is going to take some decision, there's got to be some human being that's going to say, okay, that is fine, we can go with that, but that is a blame for the human being and not the machine. So that is the difference why we can't just use the LLMs to model or to cultivate our domain model. So again, human domain experts can be used either to provide domain expertise and also collaboratively cultivate the model. You can use LLMs to provide that information, but you should not use for them to use the LLMs to actually be collaboratively while cultivating the domain model. So what I mean by all of that is that we're going to use LLMs to empower your team instead of just replace it. Muchas gracias.
¿Cuál es el software?
¿Eh?
¿Cuál es el software?
No me acuerdo.
Antes era. Talysson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent talk. So we are going to be doing a couple of questions. So there you go. You can do it in English or in Spanish, and we translate it.
Oh, I can do it in English. Thank you for this talk. I've loved DDD like my entire career, and I've been pushing for it since I read the book. So my question is, with this new way of actually driving change through AI, being a programmer like myself, do you think that these domain conversations that we used to have all the time will be less frequent, and that will make like actually us technical people not so close to domain as before?
I do know people expect that, but I don't think that's going to happen. The thing is that now with AI, we have even more information. And when we have more information, it's actually harder to find the information that is important. That is something that only human beings can do, like when they're talking to themselves and get to agreement. When you're talking to an LLM, you might have had the experience that when like the LLMs provide some information that you didn't want and you try to correct them, they're never gonna criticize you. They're always gonna like just agree and say, okay, you're totally right, that is actually what you wanna do, and this is not what you want when you're practicing DDD. We want conversation, we want collaboration. Is that something that LLM can do?
Excellent. Any questions? There.
Hey, Talysson, thanks for the talk. I wanted to do a quick question. How would you handle a case in which the domain becomes too extensive and you have to, let's say, rank or maybe give like a guide? So maybe you gave the example like, don't mistake this concept with this. Like those are some like general rules, but when the domain becomes too extensive, how do you like say, well, let's stop it here or let's prioritize it?
Yep. So in DDD, we do have a technique called bounded context for that. Like when you have something that's a concept that is very broad, we don't try to make it as general as possible. We actually try to make some divisions of it and create some at least conceptual teams and conceptual groups of people that actually know like, okay, so this domain concept means that thing in that context and in a different context, even though in the domain they're the same thing, like in the real world they're the same thing, the interest of that thing is different. So a good indicator of that is that when you try to, you have to say a word and then explain what you mean by that right after that. That is a signal that you probably have a different, the bounded context there. You need to trace a line between there. This is something that DDD talks about all the time. Like it's very important to recognize that this division exists. If you pretend that they don't and try to generalize everything, everyone's going to get confused. Some terms are going to be misunderstood by everyone. So the idea is there just when it gets too broad, you just make divisions and make it like smaller fields of smaller models.
Excellent. Any questions? No? Talysson, what do you think is the best way to start switching from the developer mindset to a more architect mindset?
That's a good question. People usually say that like a team of programmers or a team building a project, they're not actually like producing code. They're developing and growing as they learn how to solve a problem. So when you flip your mind towards like the mindset of I'm actually solving a problem, not just writing code and writing better code, which is something that we do all the time when we're juniors. When we actually know that, okay, what I'm trying to do here is solving a problem, and maybe it's gonna even mean writing less code and just using like off-the-shelf solutions and stuff like that. I think this is the part of where you begin to turn that switch and becoming an architect.
Excellent, Talysson. And what do you think is the best way to start learning about software architecture?
I would say that learning the fundamentals is important. Like, I get asked it all the time in my company, and people usually try to focus on the code, which is fine. Like, you can get to a point just being a good programmer. But at some point, we need to know about trade-offs. So as you know about the importance of trade-offs and know to, like, you know that you can measure and weight that even in smaller scales, I think that's the starter part. And from there, everything is gonna like stem from that.
Thank you very much, Talysson. Un gran aplauso para Talysson, por favor.
Gracias.
Y bueno, ya llegamos al final. Gracias a todos por estar acá, por venir, para los que nos siguen online, gracias por participar en el chat. Les recuerdo, nos pueden seguir en redes, nos pueden encontrar en X, en TikTok y en LinkedIn como @Nerdearla, y en Instagram nos pueden buscar como Nerdearla_la. Si van a subir alguna imagen, una foto, un video o algo ahora, recuerden #Nerdearla, así podemos ver por dónde anduvieron, qué estuvieron haciendo, etcétera, etcétera. Recuerden, todas las charlas estas van a estar en nuestro canal de YouTube, en Nerdearla, y también, algo súper importante, Nerdearla deja de estar solo en Argentina y vamos a estar en España, vamos a estar en Chile. Hoy se está dando una baibatón que se va a dar, hoy ya arrancó y termina mañana, donde se pueden ganar un viaje a España y a Chile para poder participar de la Nerdearla. La Nerdearla en España se da del 13 al 15 de noviembre, y en Chile del 16 al 18 de abril. Y mañana, no se olviden, esto sigue, esto sigue. Ustedes ya se van levantando, pero recuerden los que se van y los que están en su casa, mañana sigue en el Conex y seguimos online. Actividades, workshop, charlas increíbles, va a estar buenísimo. El sábado hay un gran momento porque se acercan los chicos del Eternauta, seguramente hayan visto la serie, increíble, van a estar los chicos de efectos especiales contando cómo se dio todo, qué hicieron, aprendizajes, etcétera, etcétera. Esta es una charla que se da a la 1:55 a cargo de Bruno Escopaz y Facundo Nava. Y también el sábado va a estar Nerdearla Kids, donde niños, niñas y adolescentes van a poder combinar ciencia, tecnología y arte en diferentes juegos y actividades. Van a poder pilotear drones, crear robots, experimentar con música, tecnología y aprender de encriptadores, de ciberseguridad y muchas actividades más. Y nada de esto se podía hacer si no fuera por nuestros sponsors: Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Valky, Red Hat, HSBC, Santander, Eleven Labs, Naranja X, Telecom y Disney Plus. Hay muchas series buenas. Hace poco arranqué Alien Earth, está buenísima, véanla, no se la pueden perder. Y obviamente esto, todo gracias a Sysarmin, la comunidad de sistemas que hacen que Nerdearla sea posible. Me despido, yo soy Nahue Alberti, CTO en Paisanos. Gracias a todos por participar ahí en sus casas. Esto se termina ahora, pero mañana sigue. Y bueno, Nerdearla, 12ª edición desde Argentina. Muchas gracias.
Climb started out as a way for hobbyists to push the best models to their full potential to see what they're capable of. We quickly found engineers using it to get serious work done. We're excited to make Climb easier and safer to use for enterprise and to keep making Climb the best open source coding agent with the help of our incredible community. Let's build the future of AI coding together.